Sometimes the greatest weapons aren't the ones that make the loudest noise. They're the ones the enemy never sees coming. On May 19, 1944, a destroyer escort so small the Navy barely considered her a warship was about to rewrite the entire playbook of submarine warfare. And the man who made it possible wasn't an admiral or a celebrated tactician. He was a 23-year-old sonar operator from Nebraska who'd failed out of engineering school twice, but who understood sound waves better than anyone in the Pacific Fleet. The Hedgehog mortars erupted with a sound like tearing metal, hurling 24 projectiles in a parabolic arc toward coordinates only Robert Mitchell could see. USS England shuddered as the weapons left their mounts, each 65-pound charge carrying enough Torpex explosive to crack a submarine's pressure hull like an eggshell. Mitchell counted silently in his headphones. 14 seconds for the projectiles to sink to 400 feet. 15. 16. The ocean exploded. Not the distant crump of depth charges detonating harmlessly in empty water. This was the catastrophic sound of metal surrendering to physics. Secondary detonations followed as the Japanese submarine's batteries ruptured, sending columns of white water erupting across England's bow. "Contact lost!" Mitchell shouted. "Breaking up noises, bearing 270. Through the sonar equipment, he could hear I-16's death throes. Bulkheads collapsing, seawater flooding compartments, the terrible groaning of a steel cylinder imploding under pressure it was never designed to withstand. Somewhere in that chaos, 78 Japanese sailors were dying. But Mitchell couldn't let himself think about that. Not yet. Chief Hayes grabbed his shoulder, face split in a grin. "You magnificent son of a bitch! You actually did it!" Commander Pendleton's voice came through the intercom, measured but unable to hide satisfaction. "Secure from General Quarters. Mr. Mitchell, report to my cabin. Immediately." Mitchell's stomach dropped. The euphoria of the kill evaporated as he remembered the tangle of unauthorized wiring behind his sonar console. Success didn't necessarily mean forgiveness. 10 minutes later, he stood at attention in Pendleton's cramped cabin while the commander sat behind a desk covered in charts and action reports. The silence stretched for 30 seconds before Pendleton finally spoke. "That modification to the QHB system. Explain it." "Sir, I installed a secondary amplification stage using vacuum tubes from the radio equipment stores. The modification boosts return signals in the 18 to 24 kHz range, which allows— I don't need the technical manual, Lieutenant. I need to know if you've been operating with unauthorized equipment that could have gotten this ship killed." Mitchell met his commander's eyes. "Sir, that equipment just saved this ship, and possibly every other ship in the task group." Pendleton leaned back, studying him. "The standard QHB's effective range is 2,500 yards under ideal conditions. You held a contact at 6,000 yards through a thermal layer. That's not just good operating, that's impossible operating. It's not impossible if you understand how sound propagates through— How long have you been running this modification?" 6 days. Sir. And how long have you been planning it?" "Since Key West, since sonar school, since the first time an instructor told me the equipment had limitations that couldn't be overcome." Mitchell's voice hardened. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" Pendleton nodded. "The Navy builds equipment based on what engineers think is theoretically possible. But I've spent 3 years listening to oceans, and the ocean doesn't care about theory. It follows physics. If you understand how water temperature, pressure, and salinity affect acoustic propagation, you can make equipment perform beyond its rated specifications. The QHB isn't limited by its hardware. It's limited by doctrine that assumes certain things can't be done." Pendleton was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a bottle of medicinal whiskey, pouring 2 fingers into coffee mugs. "Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Mitchell. You're going to document every modification you made. Then you're going to train Chief Hayes and every other sonar operator on this ship in your techniques. Because if there's one Japanese submarine in these waters, there are more. He slid one mug across the desk. And if we're going to kill them all, I need you to make this ship see in the dark. Mitchell took the mug, hand trembling slightly. Yes, sir. Dismissed. And Mitchell? Next time you want to rewire my ship, ask first. As he returned to the Combat Information Center, Mitchell allowed himself a thin smile. The hunt had only begun. Commander Hideo Watanabe had been stalking the American convoy routes for 19 days when he received the coded transmission that would kill him. His submarine, RO-106, was one of 6 boats deployed in a patrol line stretching across the sea lanes south of the Admiralty Islands, a submerged fence designed to intercept the supply convoys that fed MacArthur's advance. The May 20th message was brief. I-16 failed to report. Investigate Sector 7. Maintain radio silence. Watanabe wasn't particularly concerned. Submarines missed communication schedules for dozens of reasons. Equipment failure, battery conservation, tactical discretion. I-16's commander was aggressive but competent. He'd turn up. What Watanabe didn't know was that I-16 was already settling into 2,000 feet of water, her hull crushed into scrap metal. 28 hours after killing her first submarine, USS England was hunting again. Sonar contact, bearing 352, range 5,200 yards. Mitchell's voice was steady now, the tremor of first combat replaced by cold professionalism. Classification: RO-class submarine, running at periscope depth. Pendleton studied the plot. He's in almost the exact position where we found I-16. Chief, what are the odds of that? Hayes checked the charts. They're running a patrol line, Skipper. Standard Japanese doctrine. Submarines spaced at 10-mile intervals along likely convoy routes. If we just killed the southern anchor, this is probably the next boat in the line. Mitchell's mind raced through the implications. If Hayes was right, there could be 4 more submarines strung out along a predictable bearing. USS England had stumbled into a target-rich environment. Captain, recommend we maintain this heading after the attack, Mitchell said. If they're in a patrol line, we can work our way down it like a shooting gallery. Pendleton considered this. Standard anti-submarine doctrine called for attacking, then withdrawing to avoid counterattack. But standard doctrine assumed you'd be lucky to find 1 submarine per week, not 1 per day. Let's kill this one first, then we'll discuss hunting techniques. The attack developed with eerie similarity to the previous day. Mitchell held the contact through evasive maneuvers. England's helmsman positioned the ship perfectly. The Hedgehogs fired. This time, the weight was shorter. RO-106 was shallower. And when the projectiles found her, the explosion was visible from the surface. A massive eruption of water, oil, and debris that painted the ocean in spreading rainbows of diesel fuel. The crew's cheering was more restrained now. The novelty had worn off, replaced by grim efficiency. They were becoming professional killers of submarines. Pendleton called Mitchell to the bridge as the last debris settled. "You think there are more?" "Sir, I'd bet my commission on it. Japanese submarine tactics are doctrinaire. They favor rigid geometric patterns. If these 2 boats were part of a patrol line, the others are still out there, probably wondering why their neighbors went silent. And if you're wrong," Mitchell gestured at the oil slick, "then we've wasted a few days steaming in circles. But if I'm right, we have a chance to do something unprecedented." Pendleton made his decision in 5 seconds. "We stay on the hunt. Plot an intercept course to the next probable patrol station. All ahead, 2/3. As England turned north, her crew had no way of knowing they were about to fight one of the most lopsided battles in naval history. In the Japanese Naval Command bunker in Rabaul, staff officers were beginning to notice an alarming pattern in submarine communications, or rather, the lack thereof. Commander Watanabe never wondered why I-16 had gone silent. His submarine died before the question could form. 3 weeks earlier, Mitchell had sat cross-legged in the after-storage compartment at 0230 hours, surrounded by vacuum tubes, wire, and borrowed soldering equipment. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the metallic tang of rosin flux. Chief Hayes found him there, technical manuals scattered across the deck like fallen leaves. "You know what time it is, Mitch? Time to make this equipment work the way it's supposed to." Hayes settled onto an ammunition crate, lighting a lucky strike. "You're going to talk yourself into a court-martial. Chief, listen to this." Mitchell pulled out a sheet covered in equations and acoustic diagrams. "The QHB sonar operates at 24 kHz, right? Standard doctrine says effective range is 2,500 yards because return signal strength degrades below useful threshold. I've read the manual. Mitch, the manual is wrong. Not about signal degradation. That's real physics. But the threshold they're using assumes we can only amplify the return signal by a factor of 200 before background noise overwhelms it. That's a hardware limitation of the receiver's second-stage amplifier." Hayes exhaled smoke. "And you think you can do better?" Mitchell held up a circuit board he'd hand-wired. RCA 6SJ7 pentode tubes cascaded in a 3-stage configuration. "I can boost amplification by a factor of 800 before we hit the noise floor. That extends the theoretical range to 6,000 yards, maybe more in favorable conditions." "Theoretical? You've never tested this." "I've tested it on the bench with signal generators. The math works, Chief. The problem is convincing the Navy that a junior lieutenant knows more about their equipment than the engineers who designed it." Hayes was quiet for a long time, watching Mitchell work. Finally, "How confident are you?" "Confident enough to stake my career on it. That's what worries me. Your career is one thing, but if this modification causes a false contact that sends us charging into a minefield, or if it fails when we actually need it, that's the whole ship." Mitchell set down his soldering iron. "Chief, I've been listening to the oceans for 3 years. I know what submarines sound like at 1,000 yards, 2,000 yards, 1,000 yards. I've heard contacts that the equipment couldn't hold, that I couldn't prove were real, that we had to let go because doctrine said they were impossible. Good contacts. Real contacts. And every time we let one slip away, I think about the transport that submarine might sink next week, the destroyers she might ambush, the Marines she might kill during a landing operation." He picked up the circuit board again. "This modification works. I know it works, but I can't prove it without installing it, and I can't install it without permission I'm never going to get." Hayes ground out his cigarette. "Show me exactly what you're doing." For the next 2 hours, Mitchell walked him through the modification, how it integrated with existing systems, what the failure modes were, and how to diagnose problems. Hayes asked sharp questions, probing for weaknesses in the design. Finally, at 0445, Hayes stood up. "You install that tomorrow night. If it works, I'll say I authorized it. If it doesn't, I'll say I didn't know about it. Either way, you get your test. Chief, don't thank me yet. You're right about one thing. There are submarines out there. And if your magic ears can find them before they find us, then regulations can go hang." Hayes paused at the door. "But Mitch, it works better work. It will." 2 weeks later, Mitchell had his proof. The unauthorized modification that wasn't supposed to exist had just killed its second submarine. Hayes never mentioned authorizing anything. He didn't have to. The equipment spoke for itself. By May 22nd, USS England had become something the Imperial Japanese Navy had never encountered. A persistent predator that didn't give up after a single kill. Mitchell stood his 6th consecutive sonar watch, surviving on coffee that tasted like battery acid and adrenaline that felt like electricity in his veins. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembled slightly, but his hearing remained preternaturally sharp. Contact, bearing 017, range 4,800 yards. Pendleton didn't even ask for classification confidence anymore. He just ordered, General Quarters, Hedgehog crews to stations. RO-104 never knew she'd been detected until the ocean tried to crush her. The submarine's commander, Lieutenant Commander Yoshida, had been running deep and silent, convinced that American sonar couldn't penetrate the thermal layer he'd positioned beneath. His final report to Naval Command, transmitted 20 minutes before Mitchell found him, expressed confidence in his tactical position. The Hedgehogs corrected his assessment permanently. When the debris field surfaced, oil, splintered wood, a single torn life jacket, England's crew barely reacted. They were becoming numb to it. 3 submarines in 4 days wasn't warfare anymore. It was industrial processing. But Mitchell couldn't become numb. Each kill played through his headphones in horrific detail. The breaking up noises, the secondary explosions, the sounds he tried not to interpret as human screaming transmitted through water. He'd started keeping a small notebook, documenting each contact with clinical precision, as if technical language could insulate him from what he was doing. Target 3, RO-104. Initial contact 4,800 yards, depth 380 feet. Thermal layer penetration successful. Hedgehog impact 24 seconds. Primary detonation followed by catastrophic secondary. Total time from detection to confirmed kill, 11 minutes. Chief Hayes found him writing and gently closed the notebook. You need sleep, Mitch. I need to be on watch when the next one appears. We've got other sonar operators who can't hear what I hear. It was true, and they both knew it. Mitchell had tried training the relief operators in his techniques, but it wasn't just the equipment modification. It was an intuition built from thousands of hours of acoustic pattern recognition, a sixth sense that couldn't be taught in a few days. 27 hours later, the 4th submarine appeared on his scope. RO-116 was the most cautious yet, running deeper, slower, with longer intervals between motor operations. Her commander had apparently received some warning about the sudden silence from his sister boats. He was being careful. It didn't matter. Mitchell tracked him for 45 minutes, a patient pursuit that covered 8 miles of ocean. Pendleton let him work, trusting the hunt. When they finally attacked, RO-116 was attempting a crash dive to 500 feet, beyond the theoretical range of the Hedgehogs. He's deep, Skipper, passing 480 feet. Can we reach him? Mitchell did the math in his head. Water pressure, descent rate, projectile trajectory. If we fire in the next 30 seconds, yes. Hedgehogs, fire! The projectiles arced through tropical air and plunged into a sea that was rapidly becoming a graveyard. This time, the explosion came 17 seconds later, deeper, more muffled, but no less fatal. When England returned to Purvis Bay to refuel and rearm on May 24th, the task group commander personally came aboard. Captain Charles Adair stood on England's tiny deck, looking at Commander Pendleton with undisguised skepticism. 4 confirmed kills in 6 days. That's more than some destroyer squadrons achieve in a year. I need to understand how you're doing this. Pendleton gestured toward the Combat Information Center. It's not me, sir. It's him. Mitchell, unshaven and running on fumes, explained the modification and technique to an audience of senior officers who'd previously dismissed him as a junior technician. Adair listened, asked pointed questions, then made a decision. England returns to the hunt immediately. There are at least 2 more submarines in that patrol line. I want them dead before they can report what's happening. As the officers filed out, Adair paused. Lieutenant Mitchell, if you pull this off, If you actually clear that entire patrol line, you'll have changed submarine warfare forever. Sir, I'm just trying to make sure our boys get home. That's what makes you dangerous. You're not doing this for glory. You're doing it because you can. USS England put to sea again on May 26th. Her magazines held fresh Hedgehog projectiles. Her sonar held Robert Mitchell. And somewhere ahead, 2 more Japanese submarines were waiting to die. Captain Kiyoshi Tanaka stood before the plotting table in the Imperial Japanese Navy's Submarine Command Center in Tokyo, staring at symbols that represented boats he increasingly suspected no longer existed. 6 submarines, he said quietly. 6 submarines in one sector, all overdue for scheduled communications. What are the Americans using? His intelligence officer, Commander Saito, shuffled through reconnaissance reports. We have no evidence of increased air patrols in the sector. No reports of unusual mine-laying operations. Fleet movements are consistent with previous months. Then how are we losing boats at this rate? Saito hesitated before offering the explanation he knew his superior wanted to hear. The Americans have assembled a hunter-killer group, probably 6 to 8 destroyers working in coordinated sweeps. Our boats are running into saturated anti-submarine coverage. It was a reasonable theory. It was also completely wrong. But Tanaka accepted it because the alternative, that a single American warship had killed 6 submarines in a week, was strategically unthinkable. The mathematics of anti-submarine warfare made such a feat impossible. Finding a submarine in the open ocean was like finding a needle in a haystack. Finding 6 in sequence in less than 2 weeks? That didn't happen. What are our orders from the Naval General Staff? Tanaka asked. Continue operations. The patrol line is critical to disrupting American supply routes. We're to dispatch RO-108 and RO-105 to investigate the communications failures and resume patrol duties. Tanaka studied the map. Decades of naval experience generating unease he couldn't quite articulate. Something was wrong in that sector. Something his training and experience couldn't explain. But Japan was losing the war, and submarines were their best remaining weapon for harassing American logistics. Orders were orders. Send the directive. RO-108 and RO-105 to proceed to Sector 7, investigate, and resume patrol operations. And Saito? Include a tactical advisory, extreme caution. Whatever is happening out there, our submariners need to assume the enemy has developed new capabilities. What Tanaka didn't know, what he couldn't know without access to American naval intelligence, was that USS England was not a standard destroyer. She was a destroyer escort, a ship type the Japanese barely acknowledged existed. In the rigid hierarchy of Imperial Navy thinking, destroyer escorts were insignificant coastal patrol boats, unworthy of serious tactical consideration. This cognitive blind spot would prove fatal. Across Tokyo, in the Imperial Palace's War Ministry briefing room, Admiral Suemu Toyoda reviewed the weekly submarine loss reports with growing alarm. 8 boats in 2 weeks. Production couldn't replace losses at that rate. Are the Americans reading our codes again? He asked his staff. The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Japanese naval intelligence had convinced itself that their codes were secure after changing encryption systems in 1943. The possibility that American codebreakers had penetrated the new systems was too terrible to fully contemplate. We have no evidence of code compromise, his intelligence chief replied. Submarine losses are consistent with operating in heavily patrolled waters. The Americans have numerical superiority in anti-submarine assets. Toyota accepted this assessment because accepting the alternative meant confronting a truth that would paralyze the entire submarine force, that they were being hunted by an enemy who could see them when they thought themselves invisible. The cultural factors that prevented Japanese naval command from believing the truth were deeply embedded. Their doctrine emphasized the supremacy of battleships and carriers, relegating anti-submarine warfare to a secondary concern. The idea that America had developed revolutionary sonar technology and deployed it on throwaway escort ships didn't fit their model of how naval warfare worked. So they convinced themselves it was bad luck. Aggressive American destroyer groups, possibly compromised patrol routes. Anything but reality. On May 26th, RO-108 and RO-105 received their orders via encrypted transmission. Both commanders acknowledged and proceeded toward Sector 7, where 6 of their sister boats had fallen silent. In the tight confines of RO-108's control room, Commander Nakagawa briefed his officers. "We're to investigate communication failures and resume patrol operations. Extreme caution is advised." His executive officer asked the question everyone was thinking. "Sir, what if the patrol sector is compromised? What if the Americans are waiting?" Nakagawa considered this. "Then we proceed carefully, maintaining strict noise discipline. If they have surface ships in the area, we'll hear them before they detect us." Submarines hold the advantage in patient operations. It was sound tactical thinking based on conventional submarine doctrine. Under normal circumstances, a submarine running silent in deep water was nearly undetectable. But circumstances were no longer normal. The game had changed, and Japan's submarine force didn't know they were playing by new rules. RO-108 dived to patrol depth and proceeded toward Sector 7 at 4 knots, her crew confident in their stealth. 140 miles away, Robert Mitchell pressed headphones against his ears, listening to an ocean that had started whispering secrets. "Chief," he said quietly, "I've got something." Mitchell's hands trembled as he made the final adjustments to his sonar gain. And this time it wasn't from exhaustion, it was from the realization of what he was seeing on his scope. "Contact bearing 293, range 7,200 yards. Classification, RO-class submarine." He paused, double-checking the signature. "Chief, she's running even deeper than the last one. 450 feet, maybe more." Hayes leaned over the console, studying the wavering phosphor trace. "Are you sure that's not biology or a thermal reflection?" "Negative. Screw count and bearing rate are consistent with submarines. She's trying to hide under the thermocline, but my modification is cutting right through it." Pendleton arrived at the Combat Information Center within 30 seconds of the alert. He'd learned to trust Mitchell's calls without question. 4 dead submarines had earned that credibility. "General quarters. But let's be smart about this approach. If there's one, there might be 2. The observation proved prophetic. England had closed to 4,500 yards, her hedgehog crews at stations, when Mitchell's voice cut through the controlled chaos of the Combat Information Center with an edge of disbelief. "New contact, bearing 317, range 5,900 yards. Second submarine, also running deep." The CIC fell silent. 2 submarines in tactical proximity was rare. They typically maintained separation to avoid mutual interference and fratricide. Either England had stumbled into an incredibly unlikely coincidence, or these boats were deliberately positioned near each other. "They're searching for their missing boats," Pendleton said, understanding immediately. "These are the investigation force." Hayes did the tactical math. "Skipper, we can't prosecute both simultaneously. If we attack one, the other will hear us and dive deep or run. We might lose the second contact." Mitchell stared at his scope, watching the 2 contacts slowly converge on separate bearings. An idea formed. Reckless, unprecedented, and completely logical. "Captain, request permission to do something that's definitely not in the manual." "I'm listening." "We attack the first contact conventionally. But before we fire, I mark the second submarine's position, course, and speed. The moment we kill the first boat, we come about at flank speed and run down the second contact before she can react to our attack. We're faster on the surface than she is submerged. If we're aggressive, we can get both. Pendleton weighed the propose. Standard anti-submarine doctrine called for careful, methodical prosecution of one target at a time. What Mitchell proposed was anti-submarine warfare as pursuit hunting. Aggressive, rapid, violent. If we screw this up, we lose both contacts. Sir, if we play it safe, we definitely lose one, maybe both. Pendleton made his decision in 3 seconds. We do it. Prepare to engage first contact. Navigation. Plot an intercept course for the second contact the moment we confirm the first kill. RO-108 died exactly 11 minutes later. Her commander never knew RO-105 was nearby. His final moments were consumed by the catastrophic realization that the ocean was exploding around him. Before the debris even surfaced, USS England was accelerating to 22 knots, her screws churning white water as she turned toward the second submarine. Mitchell's modification gave them one critical advantage. While RO-105 sonar could hear England's engines, conventional submarine sonar couldn't determine precise range and bearing while the target was moving at high speed. RO-105 knew a surface ship was nearby. She didn't know it was charging directly at her. Commander Nakagawa, RO-105's captain, heard the distant explosion that killed his sister boat and immediately ordered a crash dive to 500 feet. It was a textbook evasive procedure. Get deep, get quiet, let the surface ships waste their depth charges on empty water. But Mitchell wasn't using depth charges, and he knew exactly where RO-105 was going. Contact diving emergency, passing 480 feet. Range, 3,200 yards. Bearing steady. Hedgehogs, stand by. England closed to 2,000 yards before firing. The 24 projectiles arced through morning sunlight and vanished into a sea that had become a killing field. This time, when the explosions came, they were different. Deeper, more compressed. The sound of metal failing under pressures that turned steel into crumpled foil. Mitchell heard RO-105's final moments through his headphones. The primary explosions, followed by the screaming howl of the pressure hull breaching. Then the secondary detonations as seawater hit electrical systems and batteries. And underneath it all, barely audible, the metallic groaning that might have been bulkheads or might have been something else. He pulled off his headphones and vomited into a trash can. Hayes put a hand on his shoulder. You okay? 6 submarines, Chief, 6 boats, probably close to 500 men. Men who were trying to kill us. I know, doesn't make it easier to hear them die. Pendleton's voice came through the intercom, measured and formal. Secure from General Quarters. Well done, England. Mark this date, May 26, 1944. 6 confirmed submarine kills in 12 days. I don't believe this has ever been done before, and I doubt it will be done again. In the CIC, exhausted men who'd been at battle stations for the better part of 2 weeks allowed themselves cautious celebration. They'd accomplished something unprecedented. What they didn't know was that their accomplishment would remain classified for years, a secret too tactically valuable to share while the war continued. And they certainly didn't know that Japanese admirals, when they finally learned the truth, would refuse to believe it. Admiral William Halsey arrived aboard USS England on May 30, 1944, 3 days after her return to Purvis Bay. The meeting wasn't announced in any official log. Halsey simply appeared, accompanied by 2 staff officers and a naval intelligence commander carrying a locked briefcase. Commander Pendleton greeted him at the gangway, trying to mask his surprise. Fleet admirals didn't typically visit destroyer escorts. Commander, I'm here to see your sonar operator. Mitchell was summoned from his bunk, where he'd been sleeping for 16 consecutive hours. He arrived in the wardroom unshaven, disheveled, and deeply confused about why Admiral Halsey was sitting at the table examining his hand-drawn circuit diagrams. Lieutenant Mitchell, sit. Mitchell sat. Halsey studied him for a long moment. You're aware that your modification to naval sonar equipment constitutes unauthorized alteration of government property? Yes, sir. Are you aware this typically results in court-martial? Yes, sir. Good. Now that we've established you violated regulations, let's discuss why I'm not having you arrested. Halsey slid the circuit diagrams across the table. Explain this to me like I'm a surface warfare officer who thinks sonar is black magic. For the next 90 minutes, Mitchell walked the Admiral through his acoustic theory, the equipment modifications, and the tactical techniques that had made USS England the most lethal submarine killer in the Pacific Fleet. Halsey asked sharp questions, particularly about whether the modification could be replicated on other ships. Mitchell explained that the hardware modification was simple. Any competent electronics technician could install it in a few hours. The challenge was training operators to interpret the extended range returns and distinguish real contacts from false echoes. How long does it take to train an operator to your proficiency level? Mitchell considered this honestly. 6 months minimum, sir, maybe a year. It's not just technical knowledge, it's pattern recognition that develops over thousands of hours of listening time. We don't have a year. Halsey turned to his intelligence officer. Assessment? Sir, if we can replicate even 70% of England's success rate across the destroyer escort fleet, we could strangle Japanese submarine operations within 6 months. The modification should be implemented immediately. Halsey nodded, then focused on Mitchell again. Here's what's going to happen, Lieutenant. We're classifying this entire operation under special intelligence protocols. England's kills will be credited to coordinated anti-submarine operations in official communiques. Your modification will be designated ANSQS-4A and rolled into standard destroyer escort equipment under the cover of a routine update. You will not discuss this with anyone outside designated personnel. Understood? Sir, the crew knows what we did. The crew knows they sank submarines. They don't need to know they're sitting on one of the most significant tactical innovations of the war. Halsey stood. The Japanese cannot learn that we've developed sonar capable of this detection range. If they realize our capability, they'll change their entire submarine doctrine. And we lose the advantage. Mitchell understood the logic, but something about it felt hollow. What about recognition for the crew, sir? For Commander Pendleton. They executed this perfectly. Commander Pendleton will receive a Navy Cross for exceptional anti-submarine operations. The crew will receive unit commendation. You'll receive a personal letter of commendation that will remain classified until such time as the tactical situation permits disclosure. Halsey paused at the door. I know this isn't the recognition you deserve, but the mark of truly important innovations is that they change warfare so fundamentally that the enemy cannot be allowed to know they exist. How long will it remain classified, sir? Until the war ends, maybe longer. USS England remained in service for another 16 months, participating in various operations, but never again achieving the concentrated success of May 1944. Mitchell rotated stateside in October 1944, assigned to the Navy's Submarine Detection School in San Diego, where he trained the next generation of sonar operators in techniques he couldn't tell came from combat experience. The modified sonar equipment quietly spread through the destroyer escort fleet under the innocuous designation ANSQS-4A. By war's end, over 200 ships carried variations of Mitchell's modification. The official equipment logs never mentioned his name. USS England was decommissioned in October 1945 and sold for scrap in May 1946. Her service record listed 6 confirmed submarine kills, a footnote in a war that had involved thousands of ships and millions of men. At the scrapyard in San Francisco, workers cutting through her hull found unusual wiring behind the sonar console. They threw it away with the rest of the metal, never knowing it had changed naval warfare. Mitchell received his official commendation in a brief ceremony attended by 3 people. The letter praised his technical innovation and exceptional performance of duty without specifying what he'd done. It went into a file cabinet and stayed there for 37 years. Years later, when asked about the secrecy, Mitchell would say, "I didn't do it for recognition. I did it so submarines couldn't kill Marines before they got to the beach. If the Navy wanted to keep it quiet because that made it more effective, that was fine by me." But Chief Hayes, who stayed in touch until his death in 1972, once admitted, "Mitch deserved better. He saved thousands of lives." And they buried him in paperwork because the truth was too valuable to share. The secret held. Japan never learned what had killed 6 submarines in 12 days. And for 37 years, neither did most of America. The first time Admiral Suemu Toyoda learned the truth, he was sitting in a detention facility in Yokohama, waiting to testify at the International Military Tribunal. It was November 1945, and an American naval intelligence officer had come with questions about Japanese submarine operations. "Admiral, I'd like to discuss the submarine losses in the Admiralty sector, May 1944. Toyota remembered the operational reports. "Substantial losses. We attributed them to concentrated American destroyer operations." The intelligence officer slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was USS England's action report, listing 6 submarine kills between May 19 and May 26, 1944. Toyota read it twice, then looked up. "This is propaganda. It's official United States Navy documentation. 1 destroyer? 6 submarines in 12 days? Toyota's English was excellent, but he switched to Japanese, speaking rapidly to his translator. The translator hesitated, then conveyed, "The Admiral says this is mathematically impossible. 1 ship cannot achieve this success rate. He believes this is fabricated to exaggerate American anti-submarine capabilities." The intelligence officer pulled out additional documentation. England's deck logs, witness statements from crew members, even underwater photographs of debris fields. "Admiral, we're not trying to humiliate you. We're trying to understand Japanese submarine tactics so we can improve our own procedures." Toyota studied the documents for 20 minutes, his expression shifting from disbelief to dawning horror. Finally, he spoke in English. "What kind of ship was this, England?" "Destroyer escort, 1,400 tons, cannon class." "Not even a fleet destroyer?" "No, sir." Toyota sat back, processing information that rewrote his understanding of how his submarine force had died. "We never considered a ship that small. We assumed your destroyer escorts were for convoy protection only, not offensive anti-submarine operations. They were, until one of our sonar operators figured out how to make them see in the dark." Over the next hour, Toyota described Japanese submarine doctrine in 1944, the patrol line formations, the communication protocols, the acoustic stealth techniques that were supposed to make their boats nearly undetectable, everything that had failed catastrophically against USS England. "How did your sonar penetrate thermal layers?" Toyota asked. "Our intelligence indicated American sonar had an effective range of 2,500 meters, perhaps 3,000 in ideal conditions. We made improvements." "What kind of improvements?" The intelligence officer smiled slightly. "The kind that will remain classified for a while longer, Admiral." Word spread slowly through the remnants of Japan's naval command. In the destroyed Naval Ministry building in Tokyo, former staff officers gathered to review captured American documents that detailed their submarine losses. The England revelation was devastating. Commander Saito, Toyota's former intelligence officer, reviewed the timeline and felt physically ill. "We sent RO-108 and RO-105 directly into that sector. I recommended that deployment." "You followed doctrine," a colleague said quietly. "We all did. How could we have known the Americans had developed sonar with that capability. We should have considered it. The loss rate was anomalous. We explained it away instead of investigating. But the most significant reaction came from submarine officers who'd survived the war. Commander Tanaka, former submarine division commander, read the England reports in 1946 and immediately understood the tactical implications. They weren't just better equipped, he told a group of former officers. They were more intellectually flexible. We followed rigid doctrine, patrol lines, geometric formations, predictable patterns. When our boats started disappearing, we assumed bad luck or overwhelming force. We never considered that one small ship, with improved sensors, could systematically destroy an entire patrol line. One of his former officers asked, "What should we have done differently?" Assumed our enemy was more capable than we believed. Adapted tactics when loss rates became anomalous. Most importantly, we should have questioned our assumptions about what was possible. Tanaka paused. Instead, we sent 12 submarines into a sector where 6 had already died, because admitting that one American ship could kill them was unthinkable. The statistical analysis was devastating. USS England had achieved a 100% kill rate on every submarine she detected. Her total engagement time, from first deployment to final kill, was 12 days. In that period, she destroyed 6% of Japan's operational submarine force in the Pacific. One ship, one sonar operator, 12 days. When Japanese submarine warfare tacticians reconstructed the timeline decades later, they identified the critical failure point: cultural rigidity that prevented operational adaptation. American tactical flexibility, the willingness to allow a junior officer to modify equipment and develop new techniques, had overwhelmed Japanese adherence to established doctrine. We trained our officers to follow procedures, a post-war analysis concluded. America trained theirs to solve problems. In anti-submarine warfare, problem-solving proved superior to procedure following. Admiral Toyota, in his final interview before his death in 1957, was asked about USS England. He was silent for a long moment before responding. "We lost the submarine war in many ways, in many battles. But that ship, that one small ship, she showed us we'd already lost before we understood we were fighting. When your enemy can see what you cannot, when they innovate while you follow procedure, the outcome is predetermined." He paused, then added, "I hope your Navy remembers the name of the man who gave you that capability. We certainly won't forget the consequences." But the interviewer couldn't tell him Mitchell's name. It was still classified. The admiral died never knowing the junior lieutenant who'd killed his submarines. Robert Mitchell mustered out of the Navy in December 1946 with the rank of lieutenant commander, a classified commendation letter, and a service record that listed his specialty as sonar operations instructor. Nothing in his discharge papers mentioned USS England or the 12 days that changed anti-submarine warfare. He returned to Grand Island, Nebraska, and took a job teaching high school physics, the same subject that had helped him understand how sound moved through water. His students never knew their soft-spoken teacher had once been one of the most lethal submarine hunters in naval history. In 1948, the Navy quietly invited him to consult on next-generation sonar development. He spent 2 weeks at the Naval Research Laboratory, reviewing equipment that had evolved from his 1944 modifications. The engineers were brilliant, enthusiastic, and utterly unaware they were refining a system invented by a junior officer with borrowed vacuum tubes and 75 cents worth of copper wire. "You've done excellent work," Mitchell told the project lead. "This will save lives." "Thank you, Commander. We're building on previous research, of course, but I think we've made real improvements to the ANSQS-4A baseline." Mitchell smiled slightly. That baseline was his midnight modification, now enshrined as official equipment. "I'm sure you have." USS England was already gone by then, cut apart in a San Francisco scrapyard. Her name lived on. The Navy commissioned 3 more ships bearing the name England in subsequent decades. But the original, the small destroyer escort that had achieved the impossible, existed only in classified action reports. In 1967, a naval historian researching anti-submarine operations in the Pacific stumbled across England's service record and wrote an article for the United States Naval Institute Proceedings. The piece, titled "The Most Successful Anti-Submarine Ship in History," brought the story to public attention for the first time. Mitchell received a phone call from the Naval Institute asking if he'd be willing to be interviewed. He was 56 years old, teaching physics to teenagers who'd been born after the war ended. "I'm not sure what I could add," he said. "The ship did the work. Commander Pendleton made the tactical decisions. I just operated the equipment." "Sir, our research indicates you modified that equipment in ways that substantially improved its performance." That was a long time ago, but he agreed to a brief interview, conducted by phone, in which he downplayed his role and emphasized the crew's professionalism. When asked about the sonar modification, he said simply, "I noticed the equipment could do more than the manual suggested. The Navy was good enough to let me explore that." The article mentioned him in 2 sentences. In 1983, a graduate student writing his thesis on naval innovation in World War II tracked Mitchell down, now retired and living in San Diego. This time, the interview was longer, more detailed. Mitchell, perhaps sensing his own mortality, was more forthcoming. "The hardest part wasn't the engineering," he said. "It was convincing people that what they thought was impossible was actually just difficult. The Navy had spent millions developing sonar systems based on theoretical limitations. I just asked, what if the limitations aren't in the equipment, but in how we're using it? Did you expect to achieve the results you did? I expected to save some lives. Maybe make the equipment 10 or 20% more effective. What actually happened? 6 submarines in 12 days. No, I never imagined that. Do you think you received adequate recognition?" Mitchell was quiet for a long time. "I received what mattered. My crew came home. The Marines we protected during landing operations came home. That's recognition enough." But the thesis advisor, a retired Navy captain, read the interview transcript and was furious. He made phone calls, wrote letters, and pushed for Mitchell to receive formal recognition. In 1984, 40 years after USS England's unprecedented achievement, the Navy invited Mitchell to Washington for a ceremony. They presented him with a belated Navy and Marine Corps medal and read a citation that finally, publicly, acknowledged what he'd done. The ceremony was attended by 6 people, including 2 journalists who wrote brief articles that ran on page 14 of their respective newspapers. Mitchell died in 1989 at age 68 of complications from pneumonia. His obituary in the San Diego Union Tribune listed him as a retired teacher and Navy veteran. It didn't mention submarines, but at his funeral, 3 elderly men showed up in Navy dress blues, former crew members from USS England who'd tracked down the date through veteran networks. They'd flown in from across the country to honor the man who'd made them the most successful anti-submarine crew in history. Chief Hayes had died in 1972, but his son attended, carrying a letter his father had written but never sent. "Mitch, you saved that ship. You saved all of us. Whatever the Navy does or doesn't do to recognize it, we know. Every man who served in England's Combat Information Center knows. Some things are more important than medals." In 1994, the Navy commissioned USS England, DDG-50, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. At the commissioning ceremony, a historian read the extraordinary record of the original England and specifically mentioned the innovative sonar techniques developed by her crew that revolutionized anti-submarine warfare. Mitchell's name wasn't mentioned. It was still buried in classified files that wouldn't be fully declassified until 2003. But in the wardroom of DDG-50, there hangs a photograph of the original USS England, and beneath it, a small placard, in memory of the officers and crew who proved that the size of the ship matters less than the skill of those who sail her. And in the sonar room, where modern equipment descended from Mitchell's 1944 modifications, tracks submarines with digital precision, there's a second placard that the crew added unofficially. LTJG Robert Mitchell, USN Sonar Operator, USS England, DE 635. 6 submarines, 12 days, 1944 he taught us to see in the dark. Modern Navy sonar operators train on equipment that includes cascade amplification, thermal layer penetration techniques, and extended-range acoustic pattern recognition, all descended from modifications a junior officer made with vacuum tubes and copper wire because he refused to accept that the equipment's theoretical limitations were absolute. They learn Mitchell's techniques without knowing his name. They use his innovations without knowing their origin. And somewhere in the Pacific, 600 feet down in water that has long since scattered their remains, lie the broken hulls of 6 Japanese submarines that discovered too late what happens when innovation meets necessity, when one man refuses to accept impossible odds, and when a tiny destroyer becomes the deadliest submarine killer in naval history. The Japanese admirals never knew it was one ship. They certainly never imagined it was one man. But the ocean remembers. The ocean always remembers. And in the quiet spaces where sonar operators press headphones against their ears, listening to sounds that travel through darkness, in those spaces, Robert Mitchell's legacy lives on. Not in medals, not in headlines, but in the lives saved by the man who taught the Navy to hear what everyone else thought was silence.